Welcome back. Jewish community groups in the UK, Canada and Australia have made a last-ditch plea to their respective governments to back out of recognising a Palestinian state. They issued a rare joint statement today, and to discuss, the Executive Council of Australian Jewry's co-chief Alex Ryvchin joins me now. Alex, great to see you again. So
Good evening, Sharri.
Tell us about this letter that you've done in conjunction with groups in the UK and Canada.
Well, we've advocated against unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state for as long as it's been on Labor's agenda. So back in 2021, it became part of their national platform. We, at that point, and even in the years before and certainly subsequent, made consistent public and private representations about why this was a doomed and foolhardy policy and why it should be abandoned by the government. And we owe it to our community to fight this battle until the very end. And this is unprecedented, as you said, in terms of being a joint letter signed by our counterparts in Canada and the UK, who have exactly the same concerns about actions taken by their governments. And so whether this falls on deaf ears or not, we, as I said, owe it to our community to fight this until the bitter end and to make one last plea, to side with a democracy, to side with an ally, to move away from incentivizing further acts of terror and domestic extremism. After October 7, the world should be unified in sending a message that extremism will not lead to political transformation. And this policy sends the exact opposite message, and it makes the world a more dangerous place, which is why we oppose it.
You and I, and along with others on the show, including former Prime Minister John Howard, have spoken about how the requirements for statehood are not met under international law. This includes borders, a proper governing body that has authority, etc. But Alex, at the very basic level, no one could have ever expected on October 7 that the most horrific massacre we've seen in recent times would have led to these woke Western governments recognising a Palestinian state. This is what it comes down to at the absolute basic level. It is rewarding the terrorism of October 7. And probably because they just so passionately hate Netanyahu.
You're right. And the way that it's framed, there's never a logical, rational argument made about why recognising a state which does not exist, in fact, meets no legal requirements of statehood, why this will suddenly end this conflict, resolve the issues that have separated the parties and lead to peace. No one has made the case. It's always presented as something punitive against Israel. We oppose settlements in the West Bank. We oppose Israeli conduct in its war with Gaza. Therefore, we will recognise a Palestinian state. That's a nonsense. That's a recipe for creating a failed state from the beginning. And Israel will have to deal with that mess and deal with its consequences, which is why it opposes it so forcefully. So this is simply poor policy in so many ways, and it's a great disappointment. But in a way, it's not surprising. If you look back to September 11, that again should have been a unifying moment for the world to understand Islamic terrorism, to be resolved in fighting against it until the end, until it's finally defeated. But in fact, it led to a loss of confidence in the West, people questioning their own motives and their own values and ideals, and actually siding with Osama bin Laden, who's been rehabilitated as a hero. We're seeing the same thing happen in real time with Hamas and Sinwar and Nasrallah and the Ayatollah. So it's not surprising, because there are malevolent actors in our society that want to turn the majority of Australians against Israel, against Western democracy and against its own interests. And that's exactly what's transpiring.
It's also, we're seeing such a clear contrast in the leadership of President Trump. And now, look, people might not like him for a variety of other reasons, but on this issue, he has been so incredibly strong. And then you have a look at Keir Starmer, Albanese and others, many others, who are going to vote to recognise a Palestinian state. And it couldn't be more stark, this contrast, especially seeing Marco Rubio there this week reiterating the message that Hamas needs to be destroyed. I mean, almost from the start, there were calls for a ceasefire in Australia.
And Marco Rubio said that at the time that the Australian government and the Canadians and the British started making these announcements about recognition, it effectively torpedoed ceasefire negotiations. It betrayed the hostages. It made it much more difficult to resolve this and get them out safely. It compelled Hamas to dig in and to believe that things are turning in its favour, and that the longer it holds out, the longer it fights, the more that it heaps pressure on the hostages and its own people, things will go more and more in its way. And you're right, President Trump has been unequivocal and has been strong on this issue because he's thinking about the American national interest and nothing but that. And he understands that emboldening terrorists is so contrary fundamentally to national security in the United States. But sadly, our own government hasn't gotten that message. They haven't understood that same calculus.
Yeah. I also want to ask you about the Islamophobia report. It was released last Friday afternoon. Are you concerned about some of the recommendations, for example, which urge a review of counter-terrorism laws or seek to control political speech? And also, do you think the response from the government was more welcoming than to Gillian Siegel's anti-Semitism report?
Well, there are certainly aspects that require close scrutiny and are on the face of it concerning. And particularly when they talk about legislating against Islamophobia, it sounds an awful lot like a blasphemy law. And that is not where this country should be going. But at the same time, Islamophobia, fear or hatred of Muslim people is an issue. As the report outlines, it needs to be grappled with in certain ways. What we reject and have always rejected is this political coupling of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And we heard as soon as Gillian Siegel presented a report, rather than a full embrace of it, which was necessary by the government, we heard the education minister, for example, saying that he would await the Islamophobia report before acting on anti-Semitism, which is a madness. Yeah. And all it does is it mixes together two totally different, two unrelated forms of hatred with different expressions, manifestations and origins, and it pits the communities against each other. It makes it look like fighting anti-Semitism isn't a moral imperative, but it's like a gift for the Jewish community, which has to be balanced against something for the Muslim community. So it's the way that it's been dealt with by government that I think is objectionable. You and I, Sharri, at our summit in February, laid out the path forward in combating anti-Semitism in very explicit, clear terms. It was backed by the experts. It was then embraced and expanded upon by Gillian Siegel, the special envoy. This should be adopted as a matter of urgency because in the months that we've seen since that summit, since Gillian's report was presented, we've learned that Iran coordinated terrorist attacks on our soil. So the problem is even bigger and greater than we anticipated in terms of foreign interference. And we need a solution. And it's not anything to do with Islamophobia. It's its own hatred. It's resulting in the burning of synagogues, in the harassment of our community, and it requires a solution immediately.
I know. It's been an urgent problem for going on nearly 2 years now. Alex Ryvchin, thank you so much for your incredible leadership and moral clarity and clear expression as always. Thank you.